This episode is brought to you by Write CME Roadmap, how to thrive in continuing medical education with no experience, no network, and no clue. Write CME Roadmap is the resource for medical writers who want to break into CME writing, regardless of background, experience, and training. It covers everything you need to know to start down the path of freelance CME writing success and provides an in-depth guide to accreditation, medical writing ethics, adult learning strategy, educational awareness, how to identify your unique writing skills, and how to break into the CME market and build a sustainable writing business. Write CME Roadmap is published on October the 31st. As a podcast listener, you can get access to an early bird discount. Just go to alexhowson.com/write CME, all lowercase, all one word, -roadmap, and I'll make sure to put a link in the show notes. Hello and welcome to another episode of Write Medicine. Imagine this. You're a medical writer or a CME specialist staring at your computer screen. The task is to transform complex clinical data into a script for a voiceover, but something's not clicking. You know the science and the clinical practice elements inside and out, but making it sound natural when spoken aloud, that's a whole different challenge. Your last attempt sounded more like a robot than a human. And now you're wondering, how do you bridge the gap between written medical jargon and engaging spoken content? If you're a medical writer or CME professional looking to elevate your scripts from page to voice, stick around today. I'm your host, Alex Howson, and we have an extraordinary episode featuring Emma Clarke, a versatile voice actor from the United Kingdom with extensive experience in medical communications. While Emma is perhaps best known as one of the Mind the Gap voices on the London Underground, she voices content for clients worldwide, including big pharma companies, agencies, and conferences. Her work spans a wide range of medical topics, from clinical trials and new drugs to patient information on symptom management. In this episode, we'll explore how subtle human sounds enhance authenticity and discuss the role of physical traits in shaping our voice experiences. Emma shares tips that will help you master the art of writing for the spoken word in medical education, learn techniques to make dense scientific content sound more accessible and engaging when you're reading them aloud, understand the crucial elements of pacing, clarity and pronunciation in voiceover scripts, and become much more comfortable and confident with your own spoken voice. Join us to learn how the power of voice enhances human connection and how you can craft voiceover scripts that engage, inform and inspire your learners.
I'm Emma Clarke. I'm a voice actor from the UK. And I voice an awful lot of medical communication stuff for clients all over the world, agencies and big pharma companies, for conferences, for research papers, a whole bunch of stuff. You may have heard my voice. I mean, you can kind of hear me literally all over the world, and I crop up in very strange places. One of my biggest claims to fame, I suppose, is that I am one of the Mind the Gap voices on London Underground. So when you're on a London Underground train, you're in the tube and the speaker says, the next station is Piccadilly Circus. Well, that's me. I voice a range of different projects for a range of different audiences, from patients to healthcare professionals to GPs and then right up to consultants. And this work a lot of it is about sharing research information from clinical studies, clinical trials. Some of it is about new drugs that are coming on the market. Some of it is information for patients and caregivers about symptom burden and treatment burden as well, and how to deal with those things. And it's so fascinating to me to record this stuff because my background isn't medical at all, but I find this utterly captivating. And what I love about this particular line of work is it is so inspiring, full of hope. It's all about a better future. It's all about positivity. Even if the results haven't been great, it's about getting to better results in the long run. And
Mm.
it's just incredibly inspiring. I read this stuff about monoclonal antibodies and what they're doing with, for instance, breast cancer. Today I've recorded something about dry eye disease. Yesterday it was about tertiary syphilis. I read this stuff and I'm suddenly made aware of the incredible science that's behind this work and how it's evolving.
And when you are doing voiceovers for clinicians, is that part of educational activities
Yeah,
or scientific updates, that kind of thing?
mostly. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's continuous professional development and breakthrough announcements. It's about making sure that professionals are up to speed with maybe even with certain diseases, maybe certain genetic diseases, that more is being understood about how these diseases work. For drugs and clinical trials, it's about disseminating the information about the drug or the clinical trial. It's pitched at different levels, as I say, from patients right up to consultants. The big issue with recording this stuff is pronunciation, making sure that the pronunciation is correct. And if it's a new drug, brand new drug, people haven't reached a consensus about how to say it yet. Basic stuff
Right.
like that can be really, really challenging. And because I'm a British voiceover, sometimes I'm asked to record stuff in a transatlantic voice as well for a more
Mhm.
international audience. But understanding the pronunciation of specific words, like, do you want schedule or schedule? Do you want laboratory or laboratory? Basic stuff like that, ironing those kind of issues out.
Let's talk a little bit about voice and some of the things that you're having to take into consideration when you are speaking scientific results
Yeah,
or
sure.
educational content to clinicians versus patients. What are some of the things that you're taking into consideration when you are voicing for those different audiences?
The biggest thing is, has the videographer allowed enough time in each scene for my audio to fit? Because it's always much easier to mix the visuals once you have the voice, but often that doesn't happen. Or they use an AI voice that doesn't breathe, that speaks faster than an appropriate delivery for this kind of highly technical material. And often they don't allow enough time. If they've allowed me 10 seconds time to record something that should really be about 13 and a half seconds at a comfortable pace. The
Mm.
pacing is really, really important. But really, it's about clarity. Because even though I may be voicing stuff for consultants, very high level professionals, it still needs to be delivered at a measured pace to allow them time to just take it on board.
Mhm.
Because, as you know, a lot of medical scripts can be incredibly dense. Every phrase, every clause, every word is full of scientific meaning and consequence. So that needs time, really. So the biggest thing is about understanding the function of the project that I'm working on. Is it marketing? Is it education? Or is it perhaps, if it's for patients, is it something that's more about empathy and reassurance? So understanding the function of the project is really important. And then, crucially, asking what music is going to be going behind my voice, because I have to match my voice to that music so that it blends really well together. If there's a kind of pumping, kind of corporate inspirational track that needs a bit of punch behind it, it's not going to be the same read that I'd do if I had a nice kind of ambient or acoustic track behind me. So it's bearing many things into consideration all at once. But primarily, it's about sharing the information in as clear a way as possible, because I'm always very mindful that the audience, they may be consultants, they may be patients, they may be GPs, healthcare professionals, whatever. First language may not be English. So I really do need to bear in mind just having that measured pace. So it's not so slow that it's patronizing. It's not whizzing by, that it's just taking it for granted that people have taken it on board. It's just at a measured pace.
So now I'm wondering about the quality of the briefs that you get to support each project,
Yeah.
because you've talked about video, so you're obviously having to align with images, but also
Yes.
you get the text, you get that written component that you are working off. I guess I have two questions there. One is, what does it take to write for the spoken voice
Yeah.
versus um, writing for a reader? And then can you give any examples of where you've had to kind of push back on writing that is too technical, even for a technical audience, because it doesn't allow
Yeah.
you to speak the content with the clarity
Yeah,
that you really
it's a
need?
really interesting question, Alex, because by the time the script has come to me, it's gone through so many iterations from the scientific team. So really, I've just got to suck it up by the time it gets to, I've just got to read it. And because it's been through so many different eyes and so many different, even governing bodies, even compliance bodies as well within companies, just to make sure that what they're saying is accurate and true and scientifically sound and legally correct as well. So, really, there isn't an awful lot of pushback that I can offer. All I'm told is who the audience is, what the duration of each scene needs to be. Because what happens is that I get the script through, and at the top, it usually says who the audience is. I've asked my clients to tell me who's the audience, so I understand straight away the kind of tonality that I need to achieve. And then each scene has a duration to fit in with the video. What I also ask is that my client sends me the video so I can see the pacing of the video and I can hear the music. And if they have done a scratch track, whether with a human or AI, I can at least hear that because that's what the client's heard. And people often get this stuff very fixed in their brain and then think it's going to sound just like that when they get the final project back. So it's really helpful for me to have that information. Also, that scratch track with the pronunciation guide, if the scratch track doesn't quite fit the pronunciation guide, which often happens, then I need to know those holes, because that effectively forms the contract for the voiceover job, because that's the tech spec. Once I receive the script and understand what actually they need me to say, that's the contract, and then I fulfill that contract. So in terms of writing for the voice, I mean, it's very difficult because there's a gulf between the spoken word and the written word. The big thing with scientific communication is please don't make the sentences really, really long. Now, sometimes that's difficult because you have to have multiple clauses to make sure it's scientifically accurate with all your caveats and your if this scenario and if that scenario and if this and that kind of thing. And I understand that. And it can't be completely impenetrable, even for consultants, at the top level, it still needs to be understandable. And I think for me, as a layperson reading this, I need to be able to understand the script. The main thing is please use shorter sentences, punctuate, please add commas so I know where to breathe. Because if a comma is in the wrong place, it can really skew the meaning. Punctuation and basic sentence construction is really important. And it's like legalese and academic papers. There has to be absolute specificity in the meaning of the words, where you can't get a cigarette paper in between any of the words for any kind of ambiguity. But please write it in as simple a way as possible. I mean, was it Richard Feynman who said if you can't explain a concept to a child, you don't understand it yourself? So I'm not suggesting dumbing down, but just make sure that the sentences are broken up and the arc of a sentence, the arc of a paragraph goes somewhere, that there's a logical journey in that paragraph so that when it's read aloud, the voice can reflect that meaning.
So many great tips there for writers who are working in that space and being tasked with
Yes,
writing these scripts. And writing for voice, for spoken voice, is, as you have so beautifully described, quite different from writing
it really
for
is.
reading. So, this interplay between writing and reading and listening and saying is really kind of interesting. And I think to some extent, taps into musicality, and I know that you have
Oh,
a background
absolutely.
in
Yes,
music, and certainly as writers, when you're teaching writing, one of the things I always recommend, and I do it myself, is when I've written something is to read it out loud, because I
definitely.
want to get that sense of cadence and pace
Absolutely.
and clarity. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about these intersections between listening and saying and reading and writing,
Yeah,
because I
sure.
find that fascinating.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're absolutely right that rhythm and cadence and meter, flow within a script are really important, as are pauses. You know, the rhetorical pause, the oratorical pause, where you're anticipating something that's about to be said or you're reflecting on something that has just been said. There are moments of drama in this kind of work. There really are. You know, if I'm saying that 98% of human subjects experienced ease of treatment burden. I mean, that's phenomenal. So it needs a pause just for people to sort of register that. And again, it's this musicality of just letting something land. Don't be
Mhm.
anxious about pauses. Pauses are good. Pauses are great. You need a rest to breathe. And I think that's the thing. Let the script breathe. If it's being read by a human being or with AI, I mean, I'm not the greatest fan of spoken word AI, obviously, no shots, but write it and read it when you're practicing it with breath pauses so that it does just breathe and flow and just have a sense of embodiedness to it. Because if
Mm.
it's too robotic, if it's too mechanical, too acousmatic, I think something is lost within that communication. The essence of that human communication goes, I think.
So I love that you use the word embodied. Tell us what you mean.
As a voice that is coming from an actual human body instead of some kind of like HAL 2001, Space Odyssey, kind of
Mm.
just this disembodied voice that is really quite uncanny and really quite spooky. I mean, there's some fascinating academic writing about the acousmatic voice, this disembodied voice, and what that suggests to us psychologically. But the embodied voice is something that comes from an actual person.
Mm.
And I think that something about hearing that body, the slight lip smack, the slight breaths sometimes. I do edit out quite a lot of breaths from the kind of work that we're discussing, but I keep
Mhm.
stuff in, some breaths in, subtle ones, not big gusty breaths, but just little breaths, just to make the point to the listener, consciously or subconsciously, that they are listening to a human being, so that it's just that bit more authentic, so that it's just that bit more rooted in humanity. Because what we're talking about in a lot of this material is about literally the blood and guts of humanity. So I just think there's something really quite powerful about almost using the human body almost as a musical instrument to play these scripts, to deliver these scripts. I think there's something quite lovely about that.
Oh, absolutely. And, we're talking about the extent to which people's teeth and the shape of their mouth and their throat and their body
Exactly.
size and shape, all of these
Yes.
contribute to voice, both in the sense of how we experience our own voice. And I want to come to that because I think that's relevant to the work that, that,
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah.
that we do, and also to the experience of hearing somebody else's voice, because, a lot of that, so much of that is about connection. You hear
Yes.
that voice, it's coming into your body, somebody
Exactly
else's
that.
voice. That's very powerful.
Yes, exactly that. You're in somebody's personal space.
Yeah.
And for the commercial work that I do, you know, even if it's like a really hard sell car commercial or
Mm.
carpet or something. I have to be respectful of the listener's body, the listener's listening experience, because if I'm too brash, too hard-edged, it's not pleasant. So
Mm.
being aware not only of your own body as a speaker and the effect of your own body on the sound of your voice, but also the effect of that on somebody's listening body is really important, I think.
The level of thought and care and attention that you put into the production of your voice is kind of inspiration to us all. Our voices are not, they're not a throwaway commodity. They're
No.
absolutely integral to helping understand and receive the content that
Exactly.
we're delivering. You did mention our own experience of our own voices. Of course,
Mm.
many people don't like the sound of their own voice, and they'll say that, "Oh, I hate to hear myself being
Yeah, I think
recorded."
that's a very normal response.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so I want to hear from you why you think that's a normal response. This is my kind of follow-up question is one of the things that we're seeing in my space is that more writers are being asked to give voice in a
Yes.
recorded setting. So, for instance, they might be writers or they might be clinical or scientific directors who have created a script for an education activity, or they have created questions for faculty to be asked about a particular topic, and then find out that they are going to be the ones asking the questions.
Yes.
And so, what tips or advice would you have for writers, for people who don't necessarily like the sound of their own
Yes,
voice,
absolutely.
who
I mean,
suddenly find themselves in that position where
yeah,
they have to
totally.
be the voice?
I personally can't stand the sound of my own voice.
Oh,
So
I
that
don't want to
I
hear that.
I can't, because I think this is quite common to everyone, that our self-perception and of how we sound is different when we hear a recorded voice. Part of that is because of the acoustics. We're kind of in the middle of the sound when we're
Mm.
talking, and when you hear it back, of course it's different, because it's the microphone is in a different place. The speakers are telling a different story than your own ears are, I suppose. But there's something quite, again, it's that relationship between the body and the voice, our perceived identity, the identity that we almost wish we had, and wish we had in our own voices, and wish that the world could hear us as we want to be heard. And then sometimes the cruel reality when you actually hear your own recorded voice back and it's not exactly what you thought it was or hoped it was. I think the big thing with getting used to hearing your own voice is changing your mindset around either the audience or the microphone. If you see the audience and the microphone as your friend, not your critics, not your judge, then your mindset shifts and you relax a bit more and you're a little bit more spontaneous around the microphone or the audience. You're a little bit more authentic, relaxed. And I think just getting in the habit of hearing your own voice, as uncomfortable as it may be, but even reading aloud, speaking aloud to a microphone, to an audience, whatever, practice is going to make it normal.
Mm.
Normalize it, normalize the fear, the trepidation, the dread, and come to terms with it, I guess. One thing that I do, and honestly, I swear this has been pivotal for me in the broadcasting work that I do. One of my very good friends and I send each other every day an audio letter. And it's probably only, sometimes we talk for, half an hour, just solo, talking into a microphone. I send it to him, he listens, he replies. And that's how it works. Having that experience and practice of speaking spontaneously into a microphone does wonders for your broadcast ability, for your ability to speak. It becomes less intimidating. You worry less about what you can think of to say. You're able to speak fluently because you've done it in your audio diary with somebody who cares about you, who you know really well, and you want to share your news with. So that's one technique that, honestly, it's helped me no end in my broadcasting.
I feel like there's a deeper lesson here for many writers who are often self-identified introverts,
Yes, exactly.
on an introversion spectrum or
Yes.
continuum, and who are often women.
Yes.
And there's this struggle of you use the word authoritative. There
Mm,
is a disconnect. So when a lot of people speak out loud, there's a disconnect from the integrity and the authority they might
mm.
feel that
Yes.
they have on a given subject and actually
Yes.
what comes out of their mouth.
Yes.
I
Yes,
know that's
exactly.
something I've definitely experienced. So I feel like there's a deeper lesson here in terms of practicing using your voice out loud so that
Mm,
when you're in those situations, you're in a meeting, you're in some kind of group setting where
mm.
you know you're going to have to say something that might be controversial. It might
Yeah,
simply
sure.
be the thing that somebody needs to say that
Else
nobody
is gonna
else is
say.
saying.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You can actually lean into that authority because if you practice, it's grounded in who
Yeah,
you are.
exactly. Exactly. And your voice is such a big part of your identity. Of course, we use nonverbal communication as well. We use gesture, eye movements, all sorts of subtle, subconscious nonverbal communication with people that we deal with. But our voice gives away so many clues about us. Our age, perhaps, our state of health, perhaps, our physical size, perhaps, our gender, our geography, our level of education, perhaps our socioeconomic background. It can be very revealing about us. We can betray a lot of information about our identity through our voice, which I think is another reason why people may feel self conscious hearing their own voices, because it lays all that stuff bare in many ways. But so much of voice work, it's very subtle, Alex. It's very subtle. So much of it is bound up with our own sense of self and our own sense of identity and our own sense of authority and assertiveness and right to be in the room. Imposter syndrome. So many women, well, people, but I think it's particularly women from the research I've read, feel imposter syndrome. And we can express this in our voices. We can kind of constrain our voices physically and in our delivery. So I do think a lot of voice work requires quite a lot of personal development as well, in tandem, and just feeling more and more comfortable in your own skin, trusting yourself to express what you really mean to say in the way that you want to say it, and being sure that what you say will land.
Mm.
And just having that sense, even if it's not entirely true, that the microphone and the audience that you're speaking to has unconditional positive regard for what you're going to say.
It's powerful
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it immediately opens up connection.
yeah,
So your communication, whether it's text, whether it's voice,
yes,
becomes
exactly.
much more vested in connection, and I think that's really powerful. What kind of things do writers really need to pay attention to? We talked about punctuation, we talked about short sentences. Are there other things that you would like writers to take away who are working on scripts for the voice of authority who is speaking out loud, scientific, clinical, and patient focused
Yes,
texts? What are
yeah.
some of the things that you really want writers to take away from our conversation today?
I think the main thing is think about flow in a script. Think about pause. Think about where you're going to breathe when you're reading this stuff out loud. Please consider font size in the script. Make sure that it's ideally 14-point font,
Mm.
because a lot of voice actors are sight reading this stuff for the most part, and it's hard to sight read really cramped up stuff. Please make sure that there's a really clear pronunciation guide. And if you're not sure how to write a pronunciation guide, on my website, actually, there is a really useful, in the resources section, there is a really informative thing that I've written about how to write a pronunciation guide. But think about how something is said phonetically. Don't just rewrite it as it's spelt. Think about how it's written phonetically. You don't need to use the phonetic alphabet, and put in capitals the stressed syllable so that the accentuation is super clear to whoever is going to read your script. Because there's a big difference between record and record, for instance, an example of accentuation. So, just make the pronunciation super, super clear, and make sure that you have shared that pronunciation guide with everybody else on the team and that it is accurate. Otherwise, you could be in a ping pong remake scenario with just getting something revoiced because something hasn't been said correctly, not because of the voiceover, but just because the instructions were a little bit slipshod. So I think as well, trust the voice that you're working with. Trust the voice, whether it's your own or somebody that you're hiring to deliver your script in as smooth a way as possible.
And I'll make sure to link in the show notes to your resource guide. Emma, what are you doing next and where can people find you?
Well, exciting things are happening, Alex, because I'm delighted to say that BBC Radio 3 have asked me to present the Saturday Breakfast Show on BBC Radio 3, which is a beautiful classical music station in the UK. It's available all over the world as well. We have listeners literally from all over. And I'm delighted to do that. So you can catch me at 6:30 a.m. UK time every Saturday morning, and also on BBC Sounds. And in addition, I'm just starting the third year of my PhD at the Royal Northern College of Music, where I'm studying how my background as a voice actor influences how I compose music, which is really, really fascinating.
And you're burying the lead there because you're also a composer.
I am. Yes, I am indeed. I am. And I've written a piano concerto, which is due to be performed next month, which is kind of heart-stopping because, there's nothing more terrifying than handing your scores over to musicians.
I think writers probably feel that when they hand their script over to voice actors as well.
Understand.
We're recording this at the end of September, and the chances are when you hear this episode, Emma's concerto will be available. So we'll be able to listen to that on BBC 3. Emma Clarke, voice of the London Underground, and so much more. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with
Alex,
listeners of Right Medicine.
Absolute joy. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I think we can agree the human voice is a potent educational tool. Its ability to convey nuance, emotion, and complex information makes it an invaluable asset in CME. For all of us CME professionals creating scripts for webinars or podcasts, remember, when you're crafting these scripts for the spoken word, you're not just conveying information. You're creating an experience. Your words, when spoken aloud, have the power to engage, inspire, and educate in ways that written text alone can't really match. As you write your next script, keep Emma's insights in mind. Embrace shorter sentences, clear punctuation, and a natural flow. Think about how your words will sound when spoken, and don't be afraid to read them aloud yourself as you write. Remember, authenticity is key. Your audience will connect more deeply with content that sounds natural and human and includes things like pauses and breath. So go forth, write with clarity and purpose, and let your words resonate through the powerful medium of the human voice. Thanks for tuning in to Right Medicine. I'm your host, Alex House, and until next time, keep writing, learning, and making a difference in CME.